How y'all doing, everybody? It's me, Crazyfrankie, and I'd like to welcome you to my Week 16 4 key game picks. Before we talk about Week 16, let's quickly get an update on the current AFC and NFC playoff seedings. In the AFC, the Chiefs still hold the number 1 seed, the Bills are still the 2nd seed, the Steelers are still the 3rd seed, the Texans are the 4th seed, Ravens still currently hold the first wild card at the 5th seed, the Broncos are currently at the 2nd seed, the 6th seed as the 2nd wild card, and the Chargers currently hold the last playoff spot at the 7th seed. In the NFC, the Lions still, at the moment, still have the number 1 seed. The Eagles currently hold the 2nd seed. The Buccaneers are still the Buccaneers have now moved into the 3rd seed. The Rams are now the Rams now moved into the 4th seed as they've taken over first place in the NFC West. The Vikings are the 5th seed. The Packers are the 6th seed. And the Washington Commanders currently hold the last playoff spot at the 7th seed. All right, thoughts from week number 15, quick whip around on what happened in week 15. If you're a Lions fan, boy, that you probably took a gut punch to the stomach and any possible hopes of what may happen, any sort of playoff run and possibly any sort of Super Bowl run. The injuries continue to mount for this football team, and it just flat out sucks. I mean, this is one franchise that it looked like they're finally could reach the pinnacle and possibly get to that Super Bowl they've been and a lot of the starving Lions fans have been waiting for. They may have taken a huge hit because of the injuries that happened last Sunday in a game against the Bills, which in all honesty, the Lions only lost by 5 points, but the game didn't even feel close, to be honest. Besides defense, the one that they lost the most is Montgomery. And that is one of the keys to their offense that's a big blow. That's a big blow to that football team because the duo of Montgomery and Gibbs had been a huge factor in the running game for the Detroit Lions. And now when Montgomery pretty much is out for the season, oh boy, Gibbs is going to have to really, really work hard to get that running game going because now he's all by himself. And he's going to have to be up to the task. And there's and the Lions going into the playoffs now, because they've already clinched the playoff berth. They got way too many question marks now going into the postseason, and it is not looking good for this football team, and it just sucks. I mean, this is a franchise that's so hungry for a Super Bowl appearance, let alone to win the Lombardi, have taken a huge hit. And it's just sad. It's just unfortunate if you're a Lions fan. It sucks. And what really sucks at the same time, too, the Chiefs somehow are still winning. Look, now, there's some big question marks because Patrick Mahomes was injured in the 4th quarter in that game against the Browns. And now there's going to raise some huge question marks with his ankle. How badly damaged is it? Could it have been worse than anticipated? Because now you got to wonder, if you're a Chiefs fan now, you lose your main quarterback, the guy that's been one of the keys to their offense, the key to their current Super Bowl dynasty. Now you got to wonder going down the stretch. Now they currently hold the 1 seed, but they could end up losing it if Patrick Mahomes doesn't play out the remainder of his games. Because knowing the Chiefs, they want that number 1 seed because they want to make the Bills go back to Arrowhead, and Arrowhead is a tough place to play. But now that number 1 seed could be in jeopardy because if you look at the Chiefs' remaining schedule, they got 2 games that are probably going to be nail biters. Possibly even the game against the Broncos at the end of the season. So yeah, there's a lot of question marks for that football team. And you look at all other football teams. Last week, the Rams taking over first place now in the NFC West. Seattle taking a huge hit, losing to the Packers. The Packers are starting to look like a dangerous team. That could be a main factor in the postseason, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if they are, given the way their power running game with Josh Jacobs has been enormous for this team. But the one that's been a big surprise now has been the Rams. The 49ers have been another disappointment. Obviously, the injuries are hurting them. I've hurt them all season long as well. But they really haven't been consistent at all. And given the fact that they basically have lost their luster after the Super Bowl loss to Kansas City back in February. So yeah, you got to wonder now, is going into the postseason for a lot of NFL teams, could the Lombardi Trophy could be wide open now? Because now there's a lot of uncertainty with the Chiefs, obviously, because we don't know if Patrick Mahomes is going to play this weekend in a crucial game against the Texans to try to hang on to that number 1 seed. So there's a lot of question marks as we head into the postseason, and it's very hard to answer all these questions, but we'll see what happens towards the end of the season. All right, we need to get into week number 16. All right, let's begin with key game number 1, a big crucial game that could involve some tie-breaking procedures here. And we're going into the AFC here. It is the Thursday night game between the Broncos and the Chargers. The Chargers getting embarrassed last week, losing to the Bucs 40 to 17. I mean, that was brutal. The Chargers defense that had been somewhat pretty good through most of the season, I think it's safe to say that the Buccaneers may have exposed them. Now, the Chargers are a slight 2-point favorite in this game against the Broncos, but that number probably will go to 1.5, maybe even 1 by the time this game happens on Thursday night. Now, the Broncos barely beat, they barely beat the Colts, but the Colts really beat themselves in all honesty. I mean, if you look at Bo Nix stats, 20 of 33, 130 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, that was pretty brutal. That was pretty brutal stats, even though the Colts really shot themselves in the foot. And pretty much they're looking like they are falling out of playoff contention here. But the way that Broncos won that game last week, obviously, the Colts really were the ones that shot themselves in the foot. Now, Herbert last week, there's question marks going for Justin Herbert as he's been pretty banged up. And obviously his ankle is also a question mark. Herbert was 21 of 33, 195 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. The offense really struggled, and obviously J.K. Dobbins has really been a factor for the Chargers and their running game, as it's been hard to run the ball. And give Denver's defense a lot of credit. See, the Denver defense has improved a lot, and Bonino has been the factor. He's really been the number 1 key guy in their defense that has really done a great job for the Broncos and really pulling off interceptions. And has really disrupted a lot of offenses for the opposition. And now with the fact with the Chargers barely having any running game now, Justin Herbert may have to win this game all by himself. But here's the thing. If Bo Nix has another bad game like he did with the Colts, the Broncos won. But the way Nix's stats were last week, he threw 3 interceptions last week, and he didn't look all that impressive last week. If the Chargers defense wakes up and get the Bo Nix, this definitely will be a low-scoring game for sure, and it might become a battle of which offense will make the plays. The Chargers are probably going to be playing more desperate than the Broncos will, because if the Broncos do win this game, they will hold an enormous tiebreaker over the Chargers, even though the Chargers beat them in the first meeting earlier in the season. But it's very hard to say, given the fact that Bo Nix could have another bad game. I'm picking the Chargers. I think the Chargers defense finally wakes up here. I think they'll get to Bo Nix. It's going to be a low-scoring game. I can see this happening, because if the Charger defense finally brushes off that bad performance from last week against the Bucs, I think this will be a very low-scoring game, and it probably might be field goals probably throughout the entire game. They'll be lucky if there's any touchdowns here. I see this as a low-scoring game, to be honest. But I think the Charger defense wakes up, and I think they'll get it done. It's going to be low-scoring. It's going to be field goals most of this game. I could see this happening. I'm going to pick the Chargers at -2 to beat the Broncos. It's a 50-50 pick. I don't know who wins this game here. It's really tough to pick here. But I'm going to pick the Chargers over the Broncos. Key game number 2, Texans versus the Chiefs. Chiefs are a slight 2.5-point favorite, and it probably might go down to 2 points. C.J. Stroud last week, 18 of 26, 131 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interception, in a absolute must-have victory last week for the Texans. Also, they clinched the AFC South, so they're in the postseason, and they will definitely have a home game. Now, Patrick Mahomes, before the injury, was 19 of 38, 159 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. That's going to be the key in this game. How healthy is Patrick Mahomes? Is he going to play in this game? Does Andy Reid rest him up? But it's not just that. KC's offense, where is it? And I'm actually a bit surprised that Pacheco, in the last few games, hasn't been effective at all, even though they've won. But something's just not right with this KC offense. Now, their defense has been bailing them out. The defense has been the factor here. But it's really the offense now has even more question marks, and the fact that Patrick Mahomes now, how bad is that ankle injury? That's one of the big question marks I have for this football team. Now, Houston, they've had some offensive struggles, but last week they took care of business. They're slowly starting to get back to where they should be, even though there is some question marks for this team going into the postseason as well. Obviously, Houston has a little bit to play for, mostly for playoff positioning, and the Chiefs are trying to hold on to that number 1 seed. But if Patrick Mahomes struggles, and if that ankle injury could be worse than anticipated here, I don't know. I don't have any more information of whether or not that Mahomes will play. That's a huge question mark going into Saturday, but I don't know. But the way I see it right now, it would not surprise me if the Houston Texans squeak out a victory against the Chiefs. I sort of could see it happen. Hard to say. I mean, as much as I don't want to go against the Chiefs in this one here, I'm going to take the gamble here. I'm going to go out on the upset here. I'm going to take the Texans at plus 2.5. Something tells me that ankle of Patrick Mahomes, probably that injury might be a little bit more worse than we think. I mean, he did really get a lot of pain in that fourth quarter. So there are some question marks there. It's going to be a close game between these two teams, but I think the Texans will survive. I think the Texans might pull the upset here, and I'm going to pick them. I'm going to gamble on this one here. I'm going to take the Texans to beat the Chiefs at plus 2.5. It's another toss-up here. I don't know who wins this game. Tough to say. I'm going to pick the Texans at plus 2.5. I think to me that their offense, they get it going against that. They find a way to get through that KC defense, and I think this might go back and forth, but I think I'm going to pick the Texans to squeak out a victory here. I'm not sure on this one here. It's a tough pick here, but I'm going to pick the Texans in this one. Key game number 3, a battle going into the NFC East. The Eagles versus the Commanders. Now this is for the division championship right here for the Eagles here. If they beat the Commanders, they will win the NFC East. Jalen Hurts last week in a big victory over the Steelers, 25 of 32, 290 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And they did a number on the Steelers, despite the fact that Barkley didn't have his best game. Now, Jaden Daniels, in a game they barely survived last week against the Saints, they got lucky they failed on a 2-point conversion. Jaden Daniels, 25 of 31, 226 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Now, obviously for the Commanders, this is also a must-win game just to try to have some sort of a playoff positioning as well as trying to hold that last playoff spot. But they're facing an Eagles team that looks to be on track. Obviously, there was some off-the-field bickering between A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts, but it looks like they might have gotten that resolved. But I don't know. Assuming they got that, assuming they put aside any sort of off-the-field issues here, Washington was pretty depleted in that game against the Saints, and obviously they're shorthanded. I'm picking the Eagles in this one here. I just think that the Commanders are shorthanded, and the Eagles defense are playing at a level that might be taking over the Lions as a defense that really, in the NFC, that really have done a fantastic job. Now, the Packers also have a good defense as well. But when I'm talking about this football game between Philly and Washington, it's just too much offensive power that the Eagles have, especially with Saquon Barkley. I just think that the Eagles will wrap up the NFC East in this one here. They will win the division here in this game. I'm going to pick the Eagles at -3. The Eagles are a 3-point favorite in this one here. And I think that's about right. I'm going to pick the Eagles at -3. They will wrap up the NFC East in this one here. I don't think the Commanders have enough to beat them. I'm picking the Eagles at -3. And finally, key game number 4, going into the AFC North, the second meeting between the Steelers and the Ravens. The Ravens are a 6-point favorite, and it would not surprise me if it goes down to 5.5, maybe 5. Russell Wilson, 14 of 22, 228 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, in a loss to the Eagles last week. Lamar Jackson in a big victory over the Giants last week, 21 of 25, 290 yards, 5 touchdowns, and no interceptions. The Steelers took a huge hit last week when TJ Watt went down in the fourth quarter with either some sort of leg injury or an ankle injury, and now his status is up in the air going into this game against the Ravens in a game that the Steelers must have to try to wrap up the AFC North. But the way I'm looking at it right now, the Ravens now have a golden opportunity now. I think a lot of things have to come into fruition here. I mean, even if the Ravens do beat the Steelers will still hold a slight advantage in the conference record because the Ravens really took a huge hit in a couple of games during the season, especially in that huge loss to the Eagles and some other teams. There's a lot of question marks now for the Ravens going forward, even if they beat the Steelers. But the Steelers have a bigger issue, and now their defense is somewhat depleted. Now that they lost who knows how long TJ Watt's going to be out. If he doesn't play in this game Saturday, and by looks of it, he's going to be doubtful on Saturday. So that defense now took a huge hit, and now it's a golden opportunity for the Ravens in the running game to get after that Pittsburgh defense. I'm picking the Ravens here. I think the Ravens will beat the Steelers this time. The Steelers now are kind of shorthanded defensively, and that really hurts them. And obviously, at the same time, too, that Joey Porter Jr. and the penalties are really starting to annoy the Steelers' defense, and they might be a huge factor if he doesn't calm down. I'm picking the Ravens here at -6. They're going to beat the Steelers in this one here. I just think the Steelers are short. The Steelers being shorthanded doesn't help them, and I think that's why I'm picking the Ravens to win this football game here for the Ravens to get much closer and to be in a first-place tie with the Steelers here. I'm picking the Ravens in this one here at -6. All right, everybody, that wraps up my 4 key game picks for week number 16. Please check the description below, and I will talk to you guys next week for my Christmas edition of my week 17 picks. So please stay tuned for that, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Take care.